This is an afternoon in England. The sky is clear. Neighbors are mowing their lawns. Children are playing at the end of the street. Nothing seems unusual. Then a police car arrives. Then the entire area is sealed off. And no one is allowed in or out of that house anymore. Inside that house, the same family, the same home, the same killer. Something British police had not seen in decades. Not a gun, not a knife, but a crossbow. And the man's name was Kyle Clifford, 25 years old, no previous convictions, and he did not kill strangers. He killed his former girlfriend. He killed her sister. He killed her mother, a 61-year-old woman who had nothing to do with any of it. But before we talk about Kyle Clifford, I want you to know who they were. Not names in a police report. They were a family, with Sunday dinners, plans for that summer, that they would never get the chance to carry out. If you live in Britain and enjoy horse racing, there is a good chance you have heard his voice without knowing his name, John Hunt, a BBC horse racing commentator. On 7 July 2024, John Hunt was at work. He was not at home, and that is the only reason he survived. That day, inside the house in Bushey, there were 3 women: Carol Hunt, 61 years old, a mother, a wife, the quiet foundation of the family; Hannah Hunt, 28 years old, the eldest daughter, with her life stretching out ahead of her; and Louise Hunt, 25 years old. Louise was the reason Kyle Clifford came to that house. She was the one who made a decision that every woman has the right to make: to end a relationship. And because of that decision, her mother paid the price, her sister paid the price, and she paid the price herself. The Hunt family had one more daughter, the younger sister of Hannah and Louise. She was not at home that day, and when she realized what that meant, I am not sure any of us can truly imagine that feeling. Later, when everything came to light, people began looking back at the messages, looking back at the late-night telephone calls, looking back at the uninvited appearances, and asking the question no one wanted to ask. Had someone seen this coming? Kyle Clifford was born in 1998. He grew up in Hertfordshire, a quiet suburban area, with nothing particularly remarkable about it. No previous convictions, no history of violence. Not the sort of person you would look at and think, this man is dangerous. And that is exactly what makes this case so difficult to look directly at. Because Kyle Clifford's story did not begin with violence. It began with a relationship. He and Louise Hunt were in love. There were good moments, memories that Louise must once have cherished. But beneath the surface, something was growing. Something Louise may have sensed, but did not yet have the words to describe. Criminal psychologists call it coercive control. Coercive control. Not physical violence at first, but a slow, systematic process. Isolation, surveillance, the erosion of the boundary between care and possession. And when rejected, a person with this mindset does not feel hurt. They feel insulted, erased. The response is not withdrawal, it is revenge. Statistics from domestic abuse organizations in Britain show that women in relationships displaying signs of coercive control face the greatest risk not while they are in the relationship, but when they leave. Louise ended her relationship with Kyle Clifford. It was the right decision. It was a brave decision. But Kyle Clifford did not accept it. Not in the sense of feeling heartbroken and letting go, but in the sense that he refused to allow that reality to exist. Constant messages, appearing in places where he was not invited. And after being rejected enough times, the language began to change. The tone changed. The final boundaries began to blur. At some point before 7 July, Kyle Clifford made a decision, and he began preparing. What he prepared was not a knife, not a gun. It was a crossbow. The choice of weapon is never entirely random. A crossbow is a distance weapon. It creates physical separation without requiring direct contact. And in Britain at that time, crossbows did not require registration. This was not an impulsive act of anger. This was a plan. And that is the difference between a sentence with a release date and a whole life order. But the question I have thought about most is this. Why did Carol Hunt have to die? Why did Hannah Hunt have to die? They did not end the relationship. They did not do anything to him. The answer lies in a pattern of thinking that researchers call family annihilation. Family annihilation. In Kyle Clifford's mind, Louise did not exist independently. She was tied to that family. And if he could not have her, then no one in her world was allowed to continue living peacefully. This is the logic of a man who allowed hatred to erode every boundary between himself and other people. 3 women paid the price for that, and one family, a father, a younger sister, must live with it forever. Kyle Clifford left the house in Bushey. He drove away, and during that brief period of time, before police found him, the life of one family was changed forever. I want to talk about that, not about him anymore, about the people who had to carry on living. That day, John Hunt was at work, the familiar voice on the BBC, commentating on horses, on racecourse, on the things millions of people across Britain listened to every week. None of them knew that when the program ended, that man would receive a telephone call that changed everything. In the days that followed, John Hunt appeared before the media, not to tell a story, not to ask anyone for anything, only to say that his wife, Carol, was the finest woman he had ever known, that Hannah was the pride of the family, and that Louise simply wanted to live her own life. That is all a father could say. When language is no longer enough, there is a question in trauma psychology known as survivor's guilt. The guilt of surviving. Why am I still alive? Why not me? The younger sister of Hannah and Louise was not at the house that day, not because she knew what was about to happen, only because life, sometimes, is that random. And I think about that a great deal. About having to wake up every morning in a world where your mother is no longer there. Your sister is no longer there. Your other sister is no longer there. And the only reason you are still here is because you happened not to come home that day. There is one detail that very few newspaper reports mention. After police completed their work, after the cordons were removed, that house was still there, on the same street, with the same windows, and John Hunt had to decide what to do with it. None of those decisions were easy. I do not know what he chose to do. And truthfully, that is not our business. But it reminds me that tragedy does not end when the story ends. It continues, every day, in the smallest decisions. As news of the case spread, Britain was shocked not only by its scale. People were shocked because they realized they had seen signs like this before. In the relationship of someone they knew, in a friend's family, in stories that are often dismissed with a simple phrase, "He's just jealous. It's nothing." The case sparked debate about the law, about gaps in weapons regulation, about why warning signs are ignored so many times. The femicide census in Britain records that, on average, one woman is killed every 3 days by a current or former male partner. The Hunt case was not an exception. It was the extreme end of a problem that continues every day. The Kyle Clifford case did not happen in isolation. It happened in a society where many warning signs had been treated as normal for far too long. And the question that not only Britain is facing is, what needs to change? So that next time no one has to pay with their life? January 2025. 6 months after 7 July, Kyle Clifford appeared before the court at the Old Bailey, the highest criminal court in England. The name British people hear when a case is considered too serious to be heard anywhere else. He sat in the courtroom, and for the first time since 7 July, the Hunt family were there as well. They sat not far from him. Kyle Clifford pleaded guilty, without argument, without lengthy excuses. 3 counts of murder, 1 count of rape. A guilty plea does not mean an explanation. And that is what many people who followed the trial still felt was missing when it was all over. There was no answer to the question why. From his own mouth, only silence. And a sheet of paper bearing the names of the 3 women he had killed. Before the judge passed sentence, there is a part of the British justice system that I think is one of the most humane elements of the entire process. A victim impact statement. A statement from victims and their families. This is the moment when the Hunt family were able to look directly into the courtroom and say what they needed to say. Not for the jury, not for the lawyers, for themselves. John Hunt stood up and spoke about Carol, the heart of the family, about Hannah, the light in every room she entered, and about Louise, the woman who simply wanted to be loved properly. I cannot imagine how much strength it takes to stand there, in the same room as the man who took away the three most important women in your life, and still find the words to honor them. John Hunt did exactly that. The judge looked down into the courtroom, looked at Kyle Clifford, and declared, a whole life order, not 25 years, not 30 years, not eligible for parole after. Life. No release date, no possibility of parole. Kyle Clifford will die in prison. Since Britain abolished the death penalty in 1965, a whole life order has been the final response available within the British justice system for crimes considered beyond rehabilitation, beyond forgiveness, and beyond any possibility of being allowed to happen again. At the time Kyle Clifford was sentenced, fewer than 60 people in England and Wales were serving whole life orders. He became one of them. In delivering his judgment, the judge did more than pass sentence. He stated plainly that this was not the act of a single impulsive moment, but the result of a process that Kyle Clifford had chosen, step by step. He recognized that Louise Hunt had made a decision that every woman has the right to make, and that Carol Hunt, Hannah Hunt, died simply because they were her family, for no other reason. The trial ended. Kyle Clifford was led away, and the Hunt family walked out of the Old Bailey on a winter day in London. Justice had been done, according to every legal definition of the word. But I know that a whole life order does not bring Carol back to John Hunt. It does not bring back Hannah. It does not bring back Louise. Justice and healing are two different things, and sometimes the system can only give you the first. There is a question that I think Britain is still trying to answer since that day. How many warning signs appeared before the tragedy happened? And how many of those warning signs were dismissed as normal? We often imagine cases like this appearing out of nowhere. One day everything is fine. The next day tragedy strikes. But reality is rarely like that. In many cases, there are always signs beforehand, threats that are minimized, behavior that makes people feel uneasy but not serious enough to report to the police, moments that make someone think, maybe I'm overreacting, and then they stay silent. The most frightening thing about violence in relationships is not that it always appears in the form of violence. Sometimes it appears as control, possessiveness, obsession, a refusal to accept that another person has the right to make choices about their own life. No one owns another person. No one has the right to decide who may stay and who may leave. And no one has the right to turn rejection into a death sentence. The three women of the Hunt family did not die because they did something wrong. They committed no crime. They harmed no one. They were simply living their lives. And that is what makes this case so heartbreaking. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest danger is not a stranger in the street, but a person who cannot accept the words, "It's over." If someone in your life constantly controls you, constantly monitors you, constantly makes you afraid to say no, that is not love. That is not care. And it is certainly not something that should be ignored. Because sometimes, the smallest warning signs are the most important ones. This case ends with a sentence, but its lesson remains. Listen when someone tells you they do not feel safe. Believe them when they tell you they are afraid. And remember, 3 women lost their lives not because they did anything wrong. They lost their lives because one man could not accept another person's right to leave. That is the most painful truth in this entire story. And it is also the thing we must never forget. When this story began, all we knew was that 3 women had lost their lives inside a house in Bushey. Now, we know the whole truth, but when every trial is over, and every sentence has been passed, the thing most worth remembering is not the killer's name. It is the people who were lost. Carol Hunt, Hannah Hunt, Louise Hunt, 3 lives, 3 absences that can never be filled. If you believe stories like this should be told to honor victims and raise awareness about violence in relationships, Please take a second to like the video. And if you would like to continue following carefully researched cases that respect the truth and place victims at the center of the story, please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss future videos. Thank you for taking the time to watch until the end, and I would like to dedicate these final moments to the memory of Carol Hunt, Hannah Hunt, Louise Hunt, 3 women who will never be forgotten.